And then, but I was supposed to teach in Italy for 3 weeks. And then I was supposed to go back and teach the KTS workshops at RADA. And then my husband and I were going to go for a 2-week holiday in Greece. But
what are you missing?
I'm missing everything, man. I mean,
just everything.
like, forget it. It's like, dude, eye acting. Oh my god, you get smile. Can you see smile? Oh, I'm smiling. It's like.
And I was at a wedding. It had been postponed for a year this past weekend. And just being like, we're all vaccinated, and being able to embrace someone. I'm never going to forget the value of that. Sorry, I'm like, just thinking about it.
It feels quite like powerful because you're like the queen of the Zoom room and you're like, we are in this box together and you can't leave. But you also really see such a thin, you're not really going deep. You're really just the Earth's crest of what's going on with them.
Yeah, you don't get those moments where they think they aren't being watched.
Exactly.
Those moments of the lack of self-awareness.
Here we are in the early summer of 2021. And, reflecting back to a year ago.
I take a big breath because I'm still grieving.
The director of the theater was waiting for us. We were not going to have a show that Saturday, and we were going to stop indefinitely. And I was very mad.
And it was such a moment of community, and we had no idea that that was going to be the last time that we heard live music.
That my body was open to the air via my lungs, right? Via my nose and my mouth. In the sense that my body was sort of permeable to the other people around me and to their air. And that we were all kind of one sprawling organism that was living together and interdependent. And it was this really beautiful feeling and also this really scary feeling of vulnerability.
Double and triple masking and at times wearing a face shield, those are things that do not lend themselves to really getting those articulators out and ready to play.
In my head, I had always thought it would be impossible to do what we do online. And lo and behold,
such a massive question, isn't it? How do I describe my creative work?
Who am I? What am I?
It's really weird. I don't know why I became a voice coach. It seemed like a good idea. And then I arrived at Central and started the MA, and I was so happy. I felt like I'd found my home.
Why I started creating was because I was really in an environment where I was always sort of on the outside, being different, being the weird one, instead of it being a liability, was an asset.
I do consider myself an artist.
Two things happen at the same time, the COVID pandemic and the racial pandemic.
And so of course I don't know how I want to teach because I was only taught the way I don't want to teach.
It's a lot. Feel like I have no idea what I'm doing.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who may have paid lip service to the things that need to be done in terms of racial and social justice, but that work has to continue because we've been awakened in a way that we have not previously. So we have to act differently than we ever have. It's not something we can just sort of go back to normal.
I don't know how you don't pay attention to it. It's something that I see and think about daily.
It is the places where you hold privilege where you can make the most change.
we can't process trauma until it's over.
Yeah.
So this is not over.
Nope.
And it will not be over for a long time.
What will you remember from this time? I'm going to remember that it was hard.
I appreciate you saying that it's hard. One of my hopes, there are so many things we share as humans, right? As mothers, as women, as humans. And that at some point, I know we have to swing this way, but that we can come back to recognizing that wherever you are in the world, in some way it's been hard, right? And to give people some space for grieving and to allow some grace.
Oh, I feel like myself getting very moved by that question. I haven't seen my family since August 2019. I really, really miss them a lot. To just not be able to hug my mom and my dad. I get to see them next month. We're flying to California on June 15th, and I feel like I'm never, ever going to take a hug from my parents for granted again.
You've just got to stay open. I mean, if we've learned anything over the past 18 months, is we aren't in control of any of this.
I truly believe in people. I believe in people that, there are really good people out there that people aren't always looking out with their only looking out for their intentions and goals, but there are communities of people serving others, willing to risk themselves for their neighbor. And yeah, that's been a huge realization for me.
As I look forward to the fall and start thinking about, working on syllabi and planning curriculum, I feel like I'm doing it all for the first time, even though I'm teaching the exact same classes I taught last fall.
How are you feeling about the future right now?
I'm optimistic.
I'm curious, how do you describe your creative work and why do you create?
Oh, that is a great question. As I got older and moved into college, I really just started to fall in love with language, with words, with text, with poetry. I remember finding Jose Rivera as a college student, and that was the first time that I really felt that I felt seen as a Latina on stage, through his plays, through his words. I think that was the first time I really started to see theater as a place to question and embrace things that were related to my identity.
Then I agree with you too. I think so much of my creative work is rooted in identity, not just in gender and sexuality, but cultural identity and finding your roots. I think theater can tell great stories. Yes, theater can be entertaining, but I think at the end of the day, theater brings us together. Theater is the thing that we use to connect into communities that we may not have had a lens into before. It is a tool for compassion and empathy and finding where are those roots? What are the things that you connect to that you didn't think you connected to?
Feeling very positive about what's to come, with the realization that nothing is promised. I think that if I've learned anything from this year, like you said, we can't expect for things to go back to normal. Normal wasn't working. The rug can be pulled out from us at any moment. And so I just really want to embrace whatever it is that's coming my way.
But after doing an entire year of teaching movement from this room and a semester of speech for the actor, where I literally pulled all of my Fitzmaurice voice work out of the curriculum for the semester, I want to shake. I want to shake with other bodies in the space. I want to touch somebody's abdomen. I want someone to put their hands on my ribs. I want to feel that physical connection. But at the same time, one of the things that I'm remembering about this period, and something that I do hope continues moving forward, the connection of the World Wide Web puts industry at our fingertips. I got to coach a show in Boston and a show in New York. I just got done coaching an actor in LA who's in the middle of flying to Chicago. I coached a musical in Colorado, all from right here. the social justice reckoning. That is something that I'm absolutely going to remember from this time, because I think this period of being sheltered in place, it gave everyone the opportunity to really investigate self. For those who might not know, I came out as non-binary a year ago. It was in this shutdown, in this period of time, where I was awarded the time to look inwards and see, who are you really? Who do you want to be, and how would you like the world to see you? I mean, that's something that I don't think I would have come to terms with if I wasn't awarded that time to be at home, to be by myself, to get to know who they are inside.
I really admired that so much about you, just over the past year, just your dedication to social justice. I admire your courage in speaking out. For non-binary folk, BIPOC folk, we shouldn't feel the responsibility to educate others, and yet you do in such a graceful way. And I always appreciate and admire that about you.
For the record, I know it's not always graceful, but I agree. It should not fall on to the backs of marginalized voices to remind the world that they are marginalized voices, and to teach them how to do better. That's your job. One of the things I was learning through the Art Equity National Board training is that when you do your map of social identity, where you find where do you land within this circle of power, it is the places where you hold privilege where you can make the most change. So it really does fall on the backs of white people who are in the privileged class, privileged positions, to step up and to get their peers to get on board.
I'm really interested in voice and speech work that is about the student and really centers them, and not about me, and not about a person who developed the work. And I'm really into like their needs coming first. And I think maybe saying not about me is too reductive, because it is a relationship. And of course it's about us. It's about our identities. It's about what we're bringing into the space, our training, our lineages. But that is there to support the students. That is there to create space for them to drop into themselves. And I think the humility comes into, I think it's easy to enter a space, especially if it's a one-on-one session, and diagnose, right? And be like, these are all the things that is wrong with you, or is broken with you, or needs to be adjusted. And I think there's some disingenuousness in our field about like, well, we say it's not like wrong or incorrect or bad, but like we're still teaching that way, we're still teaching with that in our heart.
I remember feeling very burnt out. I was also feeling a little disillusioned, because I feel like I was working with a lot of small to medium-sized theater companies that couldn't pay much, and it was just like living paycheck to paycheck and still having a day job too. It was that mixed feeling of like, well, you don't know what you got till it's gone, and relief, which was oddly enough, it was an odd feeling of relief that I could, because of this, step back from all of that, look back, and I say, oh, did I rise to that occasion? But ultimately after that saying like, you know what, I just was me. I was me throughout this, and I used my voice in the way that I felt that I could. And right now I feel like I'm still trying to like dust cobwebs off before I can like get back into it, because we're getting back into it.
I think like a lot of folks, I was like, okay, we're pivoting. And someone did a talk at my school through our teaching center, and he was saying how he really doesn't like the word pivot in relation to what we did online, because pivoting implies the idea that there's infrastructure, that the components of something that goes on a pivot, it's all there. It's all meant to pivot. And that is not what we had the infrastructure and the design to do. My class is maybe like, assume your class is not the most important thing in your student's life right now.
Yes.
And, you know, knowing what my students have been through, knowing all the things I don't know to the extent of what my students have been through, that really helped, I think, take some of that pressure off for my teaching, and to be like, we just need to be here. Do we want, we don't have much time left. Do we want to talk any more about these sociocultural shifts? Are there really shifts? Has it been more performative? Has it been more we're listening as we're watching things open back up?
My hesitancy to speak out is something that I am constantly looking at because of fear, because of total fear for being performative or coming across as performative. And finding that balance. And I have to make sure that it's not just like, I have to check in with myself if I'm doing the work.
We're going from this intellectual understanding of injustice and trauma and trauma related to that, to having at least a tiny understanding through the pandemic experience that's much more shared. Absolutely. And so I think that's a really powerful thing that we can continue to explore in our classes as well. We can't process trauma until it's over.
Yeah.
So this is not over.
Nope.
And it will not be over for a long time, even though it's easing in the US. It's, you know, I still have friends who have long hauler symptoms, and we're only just beginning to see the impact this is having on the voice and breath for people who have had COVID. And then we have the folks who have lost loved ones.
24/7 in a house. My creative work is just trying to make everything feel warm and comforting and look beautiful, and so I get to feel sort of held in the space that I spend all of my time. So I do all of that because if I didn't, the therapy would be a lot more expensive. I think I've got to create, I've got to make things. That's just sort of my response to the world. But yeah, the creative work as it is has really evolved a lot over the years.
This is a question that I think my answer to this will probably change even the next time you ask me it. But my answer today, right now, on June 28th at 12:16 p.m. Central Time, I do the work that I do because I want to keep the arts alive in people, particularly in young people, because I think they are such important formative experiences for our brains to have.
I just feel like I'm not that cogent anymore. I don't know all the time why I do what I do in the last 15 months because life is so different than it used to be. And like, I think about, you know, your second fall semester, which was the last time I really taught at Cal State Long Beach before I went on sabbatical. That was the fall of 2019, that was the last time I taught in a room, which is almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And you know, I've been spending every day with Sophie, my dog, and Mike every single day since then. And so I haven't been in a room with people like you. And I was thinking about this interview and I was like, God, I long to have even a glimpse of what it felt like back then. Yeah, because we had such good times back then, you know, simple times, you know, and we didn't really know what we were about to lose. So.
Yeah, you know, honestly, Andrea, it's really nice to hear you say what you said about feeling like you're not very cogent and not entirely knowing how to define yourself anymore. I very much feel that way too, and I've attributed so much of it to the fact that I am still early in my career and early in my journey of figuring out who I am and what my work is and why it's important to me, and I'm open for all of that to change. But for so many people, it's changed in ways that we didn't really necessarily foresee because of this pandemic. And I don't always know. And Certainly my relationship to my work today is different than it was even a year ago before I started this new position and when I was still coming off of my grad school journey. And we did have good times.
Yeah, I mean, everything
good times. Remember the good times?
Yeah, I do. I really miss it. I miss you and me and Emily being a team.
But I have to thank you too, because you are one of the few people that I know, at least in my personal journey in the arts community, who has always put taking care of yourself at the forefront of things. Have a bubble bath and a glass of wine, but like actual self-care where you're listening to your body and responding appropriately. You've always been so great at modeling that, Andrea. And I never felt like I needed that until the pandemic hit. And then when it did, I went, oh, this is what Andrea's always talking about.
I appreciate you saying that. I mean, I take care of myself out of absolute necessity, you know? Yeah. Because I think it's easy in our work to give beyond the point of capacity, because students, whether they are young artists or teachers in training, in my context, they always need more, and so the temptation is to always, oh, then you need more from me. That's the message. You need more from me, and so I shall give until I have nothing left. And it's just not true. Like, you don't need more necessarily from me. I've noticed, I gotta say, that my voice sounds like shit this last year. It does. Like, as a voice teacher, I'm used to like being in a room and feeling breath support, and I'm like sitting in little chairs and occupying a very small amount of space, and sometimes trying to occupy less vocal space because I've got my husband working full-time in the room next to me, and man. So I'm just conscious of it as we're doing this interview for a bunch of voice and speech teachers that I really wish I would have warmed up.
I was conscious of that this last year too, and I was teaching in the room. But the double and triple masking and at times wearing a face shield, those are things that do not lend themselves to really getting those articulators out and ready to play.
It just shifted everything, the way we taught, the way we interacted, like everything shifted, but yet I think for me, my response was always to sort of like, adapt, pivot, do something, right? Teach online, no problem, blah, 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 right? And finding opportunities and ways, but so that happened for the whole year. So that just sort of was like what was going on. I taught some accent classes online, some seminars online, watched all kinds of things online, did an online Zoom play.
Yeah.
Yeah. All that happened last year was all exciting, and it felt like we were all just coping. It felt like we were all grasping at straws and trying to do our best. In the moment, there was a lot of novelty, right? In the moment, there was a lot of, oh, this is the first time we're doing this. This is kind of fun. This is interesting and different and blah, blah, blah. And then now I think we're that stage where like the fatigue has kicked in. It's like, do I want to watch an online play? I don't know. No. Do I even want to go to a play physically, but be like far apart from everyone wearing masks? The stage actors are wearing masks. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. It's like, I've just lost all like, meh.
What are you missing?
I'm missing everything, man. I mean, the face.
Just everything.
Like, no,
because
forget it. It's like, dude, eye acting. Oh my God. Smile. Can you see me smile? Oh, I'm smiling. And I said, this is like set number 3, right? When you're doing reps in a HIIT workout.
Right. First one's okay. Second one, oof. Third one,
like, I know I'm ready. Like, I want to stop. I cannot. And then you go like, I've got 2 more sets. Maybe I'll just cheat this one. I'll just go through the motions. So we're in like set 3 at the moment with no end in sight. It's the kind of thing where by the time you get to set 5, your coach goes, 5 more sets. And you're like, no. I think is that we all, and by all, I mean the world and the earth needs to heal. Needs to take a step back or 2 or 3. And if this year has taught me anything, not only just worldwide, but pandemic and industry and existential issues about being an artist, to my own personal health, right? Having a bout with cancer, I think it's like, it really is just telling you, hang on a minute, this is not sustainable, right? Stop. Who am I? What am I? Do I still want to be a voice coach? Is this still for me? You know, like, can I teach? Do I want to teach? Yeah.
Because there was another pandemic going on, and I'm just curious what your experience has been through that lens in Singapore or in your own life anyway.
Here we have a very interesting racial sort of culture and dynamic. So a lot of scholars have been writing about it and saying that, yeah, we have racism, don't pretend that we don't have it, right? Have started to take on that sort of awareness and started to bring that into the conversation. But I think they get a lot of sort of shutdowns and, no, this is imported stuff from America. We cannot, like, don't use the lens and this and that, which I sort of get and understand, right? We cannot just wholesale say, oh, that's what's happening in America, so therefore it's what's happening here. It's not the same, I understand that. Yeah. But I think what they're missing the point, and that the point is, they're using this opportunity to take a moment to reflect on what's happening here in Singapore and to raise the idea that there is racism and we need to talk about it. But yet every time they make an attempt to do that, instead of going, oh, yes, let's talk about this, everyone's going, no lah, don't be stupid.
Actually, some of the teaching went better. So coming back to doing that in person this year, it's really helped me, because I've gone, oh, I know there's an easier way of doing this, because I had to really think about how to get the information across in a short amount of time. So you start to notice what really is important in the work.
Yeah, and we had some really interesting conversations with the students about their response to it. So some of them felt much freer being in their own spaces. So when they were really, doing really playful voice, where they really had to explore sound, they didn't feel embarrassed because nobody else could hear them. They could just play.
Is the first time I ran a warm-up, the students were really held back in making sound because they often had worked muted. They weren't used to being heard. They weren't used to being in a space with other people's voices. So it took a few weeks to really build the confidence to open their voices into space again and to connect with each other. But some things have come out. So I now talk about the mask as your private rehearsal space. So you can practice speech in your rehearsal space, and then you can open the doors to the theatre. And although the mask is still there, it's this idea of then opening that out to the other people.
Nice.
The clarity of intention you need to work through a mask. When you take the mask off, that clarity of intention is still there, and the language comes out has a much stronger energy behind it, because people have had to think harder to get their words through the masks. So, you never know, I might bring them back in at some point later on.
So actually, I'm being very positive. I'm not going to remember it's a grim time, because obviously this isn't just about the pandemic. It's about, what happened with George Floyd's murder and everything to do with the anti-racism, and we were in a cooking pot ready for that to really spring into life. And I think it's been a quite extraordinary year. And there are some, amidst some terrible trauma, there has been some beautiful seeds that have sprung. So it's been a year of learning, of, you know, vocabulary changes, really thinking about what language is, which is a really exciting place to be. You know, that's our job. We explore language and we bring it to life. And now we're having to think all the time about what that is, what effect does that language have as it moves through space. So yeah, I think that's the big thing for me. I think I'll come out the other side of this a much better teacher, hopefully. Hopefully I've learned something. And you know, it's amazing, isn't it, how long you can sleepwalk before something opens your eyes.
So it just felt like these questions of identity and representation and equity were being asked in all the different areas of my life, and that COVID just cracked all of that open. And you know, the fault lines were revealed, and it was a sense that can't be put back. It can't go back, can't be put back as it was before.
And I try to hold on to those really positive things. So this last term, and actually at Christmas, but this term particularly, we've got a couple of parks right next to RADA. So we just went to the park and took our masks off and did our voice lessons in the park. So we'd all be barefooted in the sunshine, sounding to the trees. And there was one morning when we were all together, because obviously we've been in really small groups, where all the voice teachers came together. So we all just team talked, and the students were doing their political speeches. And it was just the most beautiful morning. And these students have been through such a hard time, just came to life in this space. And we heard what all of us had been able to achieve as a team, the students, in this incredible space, and it just made it all worthwhile. So I suppose that's my last thing, is that through adversity we can still create change.
When I first got to VASTA in 2016 for the conference in Chicago, it was I think you were preparing for the elections of Trump, and the racial topic was on the table a lot. And I remember that was the first time I thought of myself as a Latin actor. I've never thought of myself as a Latin actor before, until I got to the United States, and I don't know who came to me and said something like, "How do you feel as a Latinx actor?" And I'm like, "A what actor?"
The COVID pandemic and the racial pandemic. I mean, the racial complications of this country go back to the very beginning of the British colonialism. But the conversations and the need for systemic change was very pronounced last summer. For me, more personally, being able to show up and to be there for our students of color with my own personal bizarre identity as an immigrant in this country and as Latinx person in this country and a white passing Latinx person in this country, but also the father of a black son in this country. So it has touched me on a number of levels very, very deeply. And on top of that, you know, these questions and these concerns have certainly come up in the voice and speech profession. VASTA has been very involved in this. And then, you know, it wasn't ironic, I suppose, that I am going to be the first non-American, or non-North American president of VASTA, and certainly the first non-native speaker of English president of VASTA. So it was a confluence of times. However, I do think that VASTA's Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and the director, Cynthia Santos-Ecure, has done an amazing job at keeping our profession very much alert and very much attentive to what we do and how do we need to change what we do and how to do it better. For me, a person of color is a person who is going to at some point of their lives be oppressed or be diminished because of the color of their skin. This, right? So I think that happens to certain Latinos or Latin people in this country, right? But it doesn't happen to all.
You cannot like label anything. You cannot like this is that. I would say that, for example, if you were living in Honduras, people would call you a white man. Have you seen Antonio? Who's Antonio? The white man.
It is so complicated. So, I mean, I don't even think that there's a solution, to be honest.
There's a problem of starting to define ourselves from the lens of the American experience. I mean, the US experience.
The way things started to escalate around that March 11th, March 12th, I knew that it was a big, big deal. A few days later, when it really hit me personally, was when I started to exhibit symptoms of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, when I started to cough and then I had a fever, and I'm sitting there watching this whole thing happen on CNN as I'm on the couch, you know, going through it, like physically, very literally going through it. And so that was a very bizarre experience. And I realized then that, okay, this is huge in terms of the impact it's going to have on everyone, and that it's going to be a very personal impact for me, battling my way through it physically, through the actual illness.
And I was supposed to fly to Turkey to teach at a theater institute in Ankara for 2 weeks. And I was taking a student with me. And like I had, you know, been hearing, like, you know, the 2-3 weeks before that, more in the news about this new virus. It's rapidly spreading the last 2 months. And then I just tried to just tried to ignore it. And literally I was supposed to fly out the next day. And we had an emergency all school meeting that said everything is being shut down, everything.
It's made me more grateful for my health in a way that I never have been, having been relatively healthy and relatively young. But to go through that, it was the most serious illness that I ever had. It's interesting to me that as voice and speech practitioners and as artists and creators, our job is to help other people to find their voice, to find their authenticity, to speak their truth, and all of those things. And we, in large part, have been kept from doing that in academia and in the industry. And I think that the thing that's important to note about this time period is that no longer will just lip service be allowed. You know, I sat as the only Black faculty member in one of the schools that I teach for, because I teach currently at multiple places, as the only Black faculty member, and have been the only Black faculty member in that department since I've been there. I don't even know if they ever had another. And we had all this talk about representation and how important it was. And several of us had said, not just me, that the material we were providing and the way in which we were teaching was doing a disservice, particularly to our students of color, but really to all of our students. And then about the third meeting, there was this suddenly, I'm not doing anything. And I remember somebody saying, we don't want to lower the bar. And it really ticked me off, because here I was as the only Black person in this space, in a predominantly white space, which it takes a lot to stand up and speak your truth in a situation like that. I think that's what people don't understand. It takes a lot to stand up and say, hey, this is what has been happening, and this is what we need to do to try and change it. So now that consistent action was necessary, people were starting to backpedal and hem and haw and all those sorts of things. But the difference is now it will not be allowed. And yes, there are people who are going to be resistant, or people who simply don't understand, or they feel defensive because they feel like, well, I personally haven't done anything wrong. There's a recognition now of systems that have long been in place that are going to be tumbling down. And so those people that are resistant, they're not going to be able to stand in their resistance for long, because the energy of moving forward and making real change is I think assertive and is going to continue, so that they won't be able to stand against it in the same way that perhaps they have, up until now. So I have real hope for that.
I'll give you one of my quotes. But this is a conservatory style training, and we don't want to give up any rigor in our classrooms.
I take a big breath, because my mother, who I cared for many years, over 20 years, died right before COVID. And I was putting together my dossier for full professor, and I had been hired by Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So literally days after my mother passed, which was a huge shift for me, I left my son, who was only 13 at the time, with a friend, so that I could go and finish my job at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, where I worked on 2 amazing shows. It felt like I was on another planet, because I was going through huge waves of grief, and then to see the calamity of what was happening in the world and the implications and what it meant, and then the lockdown.
I was living in Connecticut last year. What we found, the only place we could go walking was like, you didn't even want you walking in town, but we could go to the cemetery. So we started walking out behind our little duplex, our little place we shared. We were each other's COVID buddies, right? We decided we live in a duplex. We breathe each other's air. We're going to be COVID friends, because it was just me and my son. My family was all in New Mexico. I didn't have anybody near me. So everything was shut down. I'm teaching online. My son is doing online schooling, which was horrible. It was just, nobody knew what to do at that point. And then, so we started walking in the cemetery and reading gravestones. And so we would just walk in this beautiful cemetery, and in the spring, and the flowers came, but it gave us a sense of impermanence, and this too shall pass. And health, to your point, being in a place where you're walking and breathing and grateful for every step that you can take.
And I'm also thinking about the Vasta conference that we had planned.
Oh my gosh.
I'm still grieving. Hoping that one day I'll be able to see my colleagues again, and continue all that incredible planning that we had done. I hope that we can bring it. I hope we can birth it one day. I hope that we can not throw it completely away, but that maybe somehow we can, like the phoenix, rise up again. And so what I'm going to remember is that this is the time when a lot of people said, enough is enough. I'm not going to just let it roll off my back anymore. I'm not just going to keep taking it, because life is short. We learn that life is short and anything can
and
happen.
Unpredictable, right?
And unpredictable.
We have this moment together right here and right now. That's what we know. Is what is one thing I can do? What is one thing I can do here in my home with my child? And then what happens? What can I do in my work? And so we start to ask the question about what can we do in our world that ripples out.
We've had to lead with that as teachers. We've had to lead with radical empathy and kindness, because the grief has been too much.
Yeah.
The crying over the living and the dead,
yeah,
for all of us globally, has meant that we have to see each other with new eyes, and we have to see each other and hear each other, and then act towards each other.
Yeah.
Exactly, that radical kindness and empathy leads to action. It leads to action.
It's forced so many people to become incredibly creative and autonomous in the way that they're creative, in saying the way that it's always been done, A, I can't do right now. B, I've been thinking about not doing in the first place for a while. So I think this will be like a really interesting point of theater creative history.
Another thing from this time is the protesting, the amount of people that came together to stand up and to shout and to scream and to fight for change. that many of us have been screaming for our whole lives, but screaming into the wind until you're hoarse with no one listening.
I feel you.
And so for there to finally be a moment where people are listening, that for me, just the fact of someone listening is such a huge shift and brings so much hope with it.
What are you thinking about for the next 6 months, the fall and after?
It actually involves you, Amani, which is researching dialects of the diaspora and creating a resource that is aimed specifically at supporting actors of African descent in the work that we're often asked to do.
How is it now? How is it 2021 and no one's done this before?
How are your institutions navigating this time? My institution has been doing it in fits and spurts. I've seen a lot of virtue signaling, which I think is both trying to be altruistic, saying, look, I understand you, but I think it's also a way to avoid accountability.
This kind of goes back to what Rachel was saying and what you were saying about avoiding accountability. Is I feel like there's been a little bit of passing the buck of guilt without actually doing the work.
It's interesting because I feel like I have a slightly different take on it. Like there is a lot of, definitely there is a lot of I don't know how to, I don't feel comfortable teaching this, or I don't know how to broach this subject, or I don't know that it's my place to do so going on, which for me is only a problem when it's so you have to. Mm-hmm. But if it's will you, and if you don't want to, it's okay, and maybe I can find someone else who does want to. I think that when it's an opportunity being offered that someone who wants to take it up can fill, as to it being you're the Black person who happens to be here, so it's your job. That to me is the difference between when it's being done appropriately and when it's a problem. Like just because I'm Black and I happen to be here doesn't mean I should have to do this. If you feel like this is a job that you cannot do and needs to be done, then you need to hire someone to do that job. And it is a whole job. So go ahead and hire somebody. And so I think that's a great way to handle it, in my opinion. But I'm really happy with where I landed right now because they're really doing the work. They're not just talking about it, which I was surprised, but pleasantly surprised. That they are totally really doing it. And which says it can be done. It can be done. Who knew? So I'm really happy.
The cost, the massive personal cost of the industry. Do I really want to throw myself into an industry and a profession that could eat my life, that could completely gobble up my whole entire life? And where are my boundaries with that? When do I say no? And when do I grab it with both fists? Because it's so interesting and so exciting and so rewarding. That boundary was something that, initially I was like, I'm going to move to the mountains. I don't care. Obviously, that was just sort of just like feeling of relief. But
yeah.
When that started again, how incredibly exciting it was to teach again, and how rewarding and powerful and how much I just loved it was very valuable information to get that charge and be like, oh, I've been plugged into the wall. I forgot.
I think that one of the biggest things that I've been working on for both myself and especially for my students is working on how kind we are to ourselves. We attempt to make it feel normal by keeping the same expectations of ourselves, that it's like, I should still be able to have the same amount of productivity, creativity, availability, presence, all of these things. But when we are experiencing something difficult and we're not able to
match this idea of what we should do, that we can get so hard on ourselves. Why is this so hard? And it's like, because you're trying to deal with this in a totally different way than you've ever had to deal with this before. You know, it's like we all have to just try to be so much kinder to ourselves while we're experiencing tough things.
There was also this moment. I was walking through Times Square through the subway, and do you remember in New York City, there was this really surreal couple of weeks where we knew it was in the city. We knew it was really being passed around, but nobody was wearing masks and people were still just going about their day. And I remember distinctly walking through Times Square in the subway and feeling for the first time in my life that my body was open to the air via my lungs, right? Via my nose and my mouth. And this sense that my body was sort of permeable to the other people around me and to their air. And that we were all kind of one sprawling organism that was, you know, living together and interdependent. And it was this really beautiful feeling and also this really scary feeling of vulnerability. And that for me was probably the turning point.
You know, there's this sort of deeper understanding that I think we've all gained now, that this sickness that's raging on the other side of the world, like that's gonna make its way over here, and this sickness that was here is making its way over there. You know, like there aren't those sorts of barriers separating us from suffering that's happening on the other end of the world, because we're all dealing with this same sickness and the way it keeps reemerging in different forms. And I think that you know, hopefully is helping a lot of people develop a sense of empathy that maybe was lacking before.
You know, I have a 3-year-old now. So you know, the next 6 months in the fall are really about her learning to swim and her starting preschool and all of this. That's a big part of our agenda for the next 6 months. And that's at least, you know, something that is in front of me and tangible that I can do.
Well, I mean, that was definitely another thing that felt like sort of a relief for me in the last year or so, just like, oh, there are no opportunities for me as an actor. Like, great, I don't have to worry about it. Like this was my normal. I mean, just like all the time, and trying to figure out like, how can I get back into this without that? Because it just, somehow it was sustainable, because I've been, you know, my entire adult life, I've had that sort of like undercurrent of just like the hustle. And trying to figure out how can I keep that to the extent that I need it.
That experience I had in the subway with the lungs, it feels to me like something bigger is happening in the world right now, which is almost like a birth pang. And it feels like a gradual coming to consciousness of our interdependence in a way that we haven't faced before or haven't really embraced before. It feels like we're moving toward that, and that feeling is what I think I'm going to take away most from this time. Maybe it's the thing about our breath. Maybe it's the realization that, you know, the person you stand next to, you have an effect on them directly in their body, and they can take that effect and bring it to somebody else. And that can be a virus, or that can be generosity, you know, kindness. Mm-hmm. But our actions and our being ripple out beyond ourselves in this really tangible way. And I think that can be used obviously for good or also for ill. And that sense is what I'm going to take away. What about you? What are you going to remember about the time?
The last day of in-person classes was Friday the 13th in March. And I've heard a lot of people reference that day as sort of a turning point in quarantine and the pandemic for them. And UConn at first said that we were going to go online for 2 weeks after spring break. So we had a week of spring break and then 2 weeks of online class. My husband and I were living in a small 1-bedroom apartment that we rented. and we both teach at UConn. And so we thought, like, how can we both teach our classes in this tiny space online? Nick, my husband, and the cat, and I drove up to Vermont, and we lived there for 2 months. So yeah, I think I'll remember. It's not over yet, right? The pandemic and quarantine, but I'll remember it as being really, wonderful family time for my husband and me, and our cat, Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown. Yeah, he's famous on the Zoom calls. Like KTS, the Fitzwater stuff. He likes to make appearances.
It almost felt like there was an enjoyable aspect to this forced break. I think there was a real period of everybody receiving some grace, I'm looking forward to new collaborations. I've been in this new job for a year, and yet I don't know anyone, really. So I've met most of my colleagues online, and that's it.
How much having that mask on made me, it messed with my mirror neurons. I couldn't how much I rely on that behavior, right? Facial expression to help me check in with the students and to help me assess or guess how they're receiving material, how they're experiencing the exercises. But also the distance, the fact that I had to, at NTI, at the National Theater Institute, they literally taped out, an area on the floor in the studio where I could be. And I couldn't really walk around the studio outside of that area. So being far from the students just felt, it made it difficult. So I have a little bit of anxiety about that coming into UConn, because I do think we'll be masked and distanced. And I miss all of those partner exercises, those small group exercises that involve touch, that are just so useful in my experience for students to literally feel what's happening in someone else's breath, and, in the vibration of their voice through their bodies.
When I think about having students in the room with me and actually really being able to see what their breath is doing and being able to see, I feel like my level of curiosity and excitement with actually being able to see that and let that hugely influence where we go next in a class. I think that's going to be heightened when we get back,
It's so lovely to see you, Lizita.
I know. It's wonderful that we get to do this.
Yeah. Thank you for suggesting me.
Oh, pleasure. I just thought, we met at Vasta in Singapore, and you're on the other side of the country.
Yeah, with a time difference, which is always a strange thing in Australia, I think. Yeah. We're so used to considering the time zones of the rest of the world that I constantly forget that we have time zones within our own country as well. The first thing I thought of was the Vasta conference, and I thought, okay, well, we're going to need a contingency plan. So that was flagged at the end of February, but I was also working on Billy Elliot, the national tour at the time, which was running at the Regent Theatre here. And I'd go to the theatre in the nighttime and I'd think, oh my God, it just takes one person here to have the virus, and we'd all be sent home for 2 weeks. Coming back this year has been harder than teaching online all of last year because of the hangover and the impact of that period of online learning.
A whole lot of us are about to go back in, and there's a lot more, it feels like there's a lot more trauma in our spaces here too because of the length of that. But I'm curious what you're saying, Amy, if you could expand on what you mean by it was harder.
That there's a greater sense of entitlement here amongst young people than there may be in America, because we've had a good experience of the pandemic. And so a repercussion of that is, why did you make us stay online for so long? Why did the university make this decision? Why do we still have to pay our fees? It's very rare that someone knows someone who's had the virus. Entitlement's probably not the right word. It's just maybe a not necessarily a deep understanding of the severity of the virus and what's going on in the world. And then the other thing is the mental health, how they're coping with being, I mean, at the beginning of this year, it was very overwhelming for a number of them to be in a shared space with other people, because they hadn't done that in a very long time. And that was something that we were kind of aware of as a group of teachers, but not, I don't think we put as much thought into it as maybe we should have, because we didn't see it coming necessarily, that there would be so much anxiety around that. And because it's taken the students by surprise when it's happened, that some of them will have a instinctive reaction to suddenly being so close to someone that they didn't realize they would have, because you're not going back to how things were pre-pandemic. You're actually going back to an entirely different, changed workplace that needs to operate differently for some time, because we are still in a pandemic.
I definitely feel what it's given me is that I need to be kind. And now I feel I've changed in that I'm meeting the student where they are, and I'm hopefully encouraging them, guiding them, and supporting them.
I absolutely love that question. I love that question because it's it makes me think of like those moments where, you know, I have experienced real connection with community. It's been tough for everyone, for us as theater makers, where we're used to hugging people and you know, being around like a family within the theater. Yeah. And now everything has happened on Zoom, you know, for the past year and a half. And so, you know, like what I'm going to remember is, you know, that moment where I was accepted as a junior board member, you know, being able to form communities within the VASTA community, and being able to connect, or like what's happening on the streets with, you know, the movement in theater and Black Lives Matter, and what's happening just here in the USA and also around the world. And the fact that people are willing to risk their careers for doing right, and that's very noble. I think it's something, you know, like what's happening now we haven't seen for a long time.
Oh my gosh, it so warms my heart to hear you say that about the junior board. It's so wonderful to be on it with you. It's been like such a great, just such a great like community with the four of us, and to get to be more involved in VASTA. So I'm so grateful, and I'm so grateful like you applied and that you're here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this kind of thing hasn't happened in a long time, that I really sense in our industry, whether that be theater, whether that be theater education, this immense push for change that I think has been talked about, you know, because certainly like there's been so many amazing theater makers making changes for, you know, years and years and years, decades and decades and decades. But this is the first time in a long time where I feel like it's happening throughout the entire industry. And like conversations are happening amongst so many different parts of the industry, and people are really having to like meet this reckoning of social change, of anti-racism, of privilege, you know, so many different things that I like, as we sort of start to re-enter doing theater, I see a lot of theaters kind of stepping back and doing all the things they used to do. But what I also sense is from the community, from my students, is the like, yeah, but we know what you're doing now and it's not okay. And you need to change, or you're not going to be successful. Like, you're not going to make great art. Something I've said over the last year, which was only my second year of teaching, is that what I really feel is I know how I don't want to teach, and I don't think I know yet how I do want to teach. And I think that's the same for like my art, is I know what I don't want, I don't like, but I'm not sure yet where I'm going. And that has given me like this really strong imposter syndrome, because I'm like, I'm the leader, I'm the teacher, I'm supposed to know these things. And I'm like, no, I don't have to know, because my students, whether they be undergrads, grad students, whoever, or if they're actors in a room or on Zoom that I'm coaching for some production, you know, it's a collaboration. And so that's what I really want to take into the next 6 months, is like not expecting myself to have all the answers, and also like not having the hubris of like thinking my answers are the answers, like that they're the right answer. But that, yeah, like, and somebody said in a workshop I was recently, and they called themselves, the workshop leader called themselves the lead learner. And I'm like, I love that like, you know, because I think teachers always say like, oh, I'm learning with you. And sometimes it just kind of sounds like, you know, bullshit a little bit. But I'm like, no, I really do feel that like I'm the lead learner, the lead collaborator. I'm kind of guiding the room, but I really want it to be collaborative in everything I do, and to like find those moments, so many more moments for me to not have the answer and me to sit back and allow someone else to, you know, take the reins.
It reminds me of like a martial arts person who's like has to fight with one arm tied behind their back or something, and you still have to get to the end result, and then you get your arm back or whatever, and you're like,
I'm not left-handed.
Which actually, I just saw a play for the first time.
Hey, what play did you see?
Who cares, really? It was just to be there, you know? It was like, and the curtain call was the best part, because it was only a cast of 3, and they were hugging each other as if it was their first night back in the theater, which it wasn't, but it had that feeling of like, oh, we're back, and it was just absolutely beautiful.
For women and for single moms, the amount of pressure that we have been under. You know, I can't wait till you come out here and we go to Santa Fe and have some margaritas together, because we deserve to celebrate. We, you know, our small little, you know, there's the big global, but there's the human, Micah, me, Pamela, like just saying, look at us, my gosh, you know, we did okay.
It made me like militantly caring, and I was like an angry caring
turn of phrase.
And as a result, their journey, their human journey was more important than any outcome, and as a result, the outcome was better.
Through adversity, we can still create change.